What if the person everyone admired was secretly praying that just one soul would notice she was exhausted? Rain swept across downtown Seattle in long silver ribbons as the lights inside Reynolds Technologies remained glowing long after every neighboring office had gone dark. The cleaning crews had already finished their rounds. The elevators chimed less often. Even the quiet hum of computers seemed softer, as though the entire building had begun whispering instead of speaking. High above the empty streets, Natalie Reynolds stood alone inside the executive conference room, one hand resting lightly against the polished glass wall while pages of financial reports lay scattered across the table behind her. 12 hours of meetings had become 14. 14 had quietly become 16. Investors had celebrated another record quarter. Board members had congratulated her leadership. News outlets praised her vision. Yet none of those victories could convince her body that it had enough strength left to reach home. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, took a slow breath, and gathered the last folder into her leather briefcase before switching off the conference room lights. The hallway outside echoed gently beneath her heels as she walked toward the private elevator reserved for executive leadership. On the ground floor, Lucas Carter finished locking the maintenance workshop after repairing a malfunctioning air conditioning unit that had kept him working well beyond his normal shift. His blue flannel shirt carried faint traces of dust despite his careful effort to brush it clean before leaving. He checked the time on his watch and smiled quietly to himself. If traffic stayed light, he would still make it home in time to help his 8-year-old daughter finish her science project before bed. Honest work had never made him rich, but it had taught him something more valuable. Every promise kept at home mattered more than every compliment received at work. As Lucas stepped into the underground parking garage, the cool concrete air carried the scent of fresh rain drifting through the entrance ramps. The garage was almost empty except for a single luxury sedan parked near the executive elevators. He noticed Natalie standing beside the driver's door, one hand resting against the roof of the vehicle while the other pressed gently against her forehead. She did not appear frightened. She simply looked completely drained, as though every ounce of determination that had carried her through the day had quietly disappeared. Lucas hesitated only a second before walking over. "Ms. Reynolds." She opened her eyes slowly and offered a polite smile that seemed almost too tired to hold. "Good evening, Lucas." He noticed her keys still hanging loosely in her hand. "Are you all right?" She looked toward the driver's seat, then back at him. "I thought I could drive home. I was wrong." Lucas glanced around the nearly empty garage. "Is your driver on the way?" She gave a faint shake of her head. "His daughter became sick tonight. I told him to stay with his family." Silence settled gently between them while distant thunder rolled across the city above. Lucas looked at the rain pouring beyond the garage entrance and then back at his exhausted employer. "If you are comfortable with it," he said quietly, "I can drive you home." Natalie studied him for a long moment. She had spoken with Lucas only a handful of times over the years, usually about maintenance schedules or building repairs. Yet there was something steady in his voice that carried no ambition, no hesitation, and no expectation of reward. Only simple kindness. She handed him the keys without another word. During the drive, the windshield wipers moved in a calm rhythm, while Seattle's rain blurred the city lights into soft ribbons of gold and white. Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. Natalie watched familiar streets pass outside her window, realizing it had been months since she had ridden in a car without answering emails or preparing for another meeting. Lucas kept both hands on the steering wheel, focused only on the road ahead. It felt less like an executive escort and more like one ordinary person helping another find the strength to get home. The luxury sedan rolled quietly beneath the towering maple trees that lined Natalie's private street before Lucas eased to a gentle stop in front of a modern home overlooking the dark waters of Lake Washington. Rain continued tapping softly against the windshield while warm lights glowed through the tall windows, giving the house the appearance of comfort even though it somehow felt strangely empty. Lucas shifted the car into park and turned toward Natalie. "We are here." She looked out the window but made no effort to reach for the door handle. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt honest. The kind of silence that only appeared when two people had nothing left to prove. Lucas glanced toward the front entrance. "Would you like me to walk you inside?" Natalie smiled faintly. "I think I can manage the last few steps." She reached for the door, then stopped halfway. Instead of opening it, she slowly turned back toward him. Her expression had changed. The polished confidence that employees saw every morning had quietly disappeared. In its place was simple curiosity. "Lucas," she asked gently, "when was the last time someone asked how you were doing?" The question landed with unexpected weight. Lucas blinked once, almost as though he had misunderstood it. During years of repairing elevators, replacing light fixtures, fixing heating systems, and quietly keeping the building running, people usually asked what needed fixing. They asked whether something was finished. They asked if he could stay a little longer. Very few people had ever asked about him. He looked through the rain-covered windshield before answering with complete honesty. "I honestly cannot remember." Natalie lowered her eyes for a moment. "Neither can I." Another quiet pause settled inside the car, while the windshield wipers continued their steady rhythm. Outside, rainwater flowed gently along the curb, carrying tiny reflections of streetlights toward the lake below. Lucas finally smiled, not because the conversation had become easier, but because someone had cared enough to ask a question no one else had thought to ask. "I am doing all right," he said softly. "Some days are harder than others, but my daughter gives me a reason to keep going every morning." Natalie looked at him with genuine interest. "How old is she?" "8. His smile grew warmer. "She believes pancakes solve almost every problem." Natalie laughed quietly, the sound light enough to surprise even herself. "That is probably wiser than half the advice I hear in board meetings." Lucas chuckled. She would appreciate hearing that. Natalie leaned back in her seat, allowing herself to relax for what felt like the first time in weeks. "My schedule is filled from sunrise until late at night," she admitted. "Hundreds of conversations every week. Yet somehow none of them feel personal anymore." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "People often speak to titles before they speak to people." Natalie looked at him, surprised by the simplicity of the observation. "You notice things." He shrugged gently. "Maintenance teaches you that. You learn to pay attention before something breaks." Those words lingered in the quiet air long after he finished speaking. Natalie realized he was not only talking about buildings. She reached for the door again, but paused one final time. "Thank you for bringing me home tonight." Lucas offered the same calm smile she had noticed in the parking garage. "You are welcome, Ms. Reynolds." She shook her head almost immediately. "When it is just the two of us, I think Natalie will do." Lucas hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering. "Good night, Natalie." She stepped into the cool evening rain, carrying something far lighter than her briefcase. It was not relief from work. It was the quiet realization that one sincere question had opened a door inside both of them that neither had expected to find. The following morning, Seattle awakened beneath a blanket of pale gray clouds, and although the rain had finally stopped, the city still carried the quiet scent of wet pavement and fresh cedar drifting through the cool air. Lucas Carter had already been awake for more than an hour. Soft music played from a small kitchen radio while pancakes browned gently on the griddle. Across the table, his 8-year-old daughter, Ava, carefully colored the planets for her science project, occasionally stealing pieces of fresh fruit from the bowl beside her father. "Daddy," she asked between bites, "did you fix everything at work yesterday?" Lucas smiled while turning another pancake. "Not everything." She tilted her head. "What was broken?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes people are just very tired. You cannot fix that with a wrench." Ava accepted the answer with the quiet wisdom children often carried. "Maybe they just need somebody nice." Lucas laughed softly. "You might be right." After breakfast, he walked her to school, carrying the poster board while she proudly explained every planet in the solar system. As she disappeared through the front doors, Lucas stood watching for a few extra seconds before heading toward Reynolds Technologies. Every morning followed nearly the same rhythm, and that dependable routine had become the foundation that kept both father and daughter moving forward after years of learning to rely only on each other. Across the city, Natalie Reynolds entered the executive floor with the same calm confidence every employee expected from their chief executive officer. Assistants greeted her. Directors waited outside conference rooms. The day's schedule stretched across every available hour on her calendar. Yet something felt different. During the first strategy meeting, while executives debated expansion plans and quarterly forecasts, Natalie's attention drifted for only a brief moment. She remembered a quiet voice asking nothing in return, a windshield covered with rain, and a man who had answered a deeply personal question without pretending everything was perfect. "Natalie," one board member asked. She blinked gently and returned to the discussion. "I apologize. Please continue." The meeting moved forward, but her thoughts continued returning to the previous evening. She realized something unusual. Lucas had never once treated her like the most powerful person in the company. He had simply treated her like someone who needed help getting home. Late that morning, Lucas worked through his regular maintenance inspections, replacing worn ceiling lights, checking air filters, and repairing a conference room projector before the afternoon presentations began. Most employees passed him with polite smiles or quick greetings. He appreciated every one of them. Honest work rarely attracted attention, but that had never bothered him. As he finished tightening the final panel on the projector, he heard familiar footsteps approaching across the polished hallway floor. He looked up in surprise. Natalie stood only a few feet away, dressed in her elegant white business suit, carrying nothing except a simple paper coffee cup. There were no executives beside her, no assistants taking notes, and no cameras following her schedule. She smiled with quiet sincerity. "Good morning, Lucas." He nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Natalie." Saying her first name still felt unfamiliar, but she noticed the effort and smiled a little wider. She lifted the second coffee cup she had been holding behind the first. "I realized something during my first meeting today." Lucas looked at her curiously. "What is that?" She handed him the warm cup. "Yesterday you made sure I got home safely." She paused, her expression gentle and genuine. "This morning, I thought perhaps someone should make sure you remembered to take a break." Lucas accepted the coffee with both hands, almost as though it were something too valuable to spill. The warmth of the paper cup spread through his fingers while Natalie offered a grateful smile before continuing down the hallway toward another executive meeting. Several employees glanced in their direction with quiet curiosity, but neither of them seemed to notice. Lucas watched her disappear around the corner before taking his first sip. It was nothing more than ordinary coffee, yet somehow it carried a kindness that stayed with him long after the cup was empty. During the following week, small moments began quietly weaving themselves into their busy routines. Natalie occasionally stopped by the maintenance office to ask whether everything in the building was running smoothly. Lucas answered with the same calm professionalism he offered everyone else, but their conversations gradually wandered beyond broken lights and heating systems. One afternoon, she asked whether Ava had enjoyed presenting her science project. Lucas smiled proudly. She earned the highest score in her class. She celebrated by asking for pancakes again. Natalie laughed. "I think your daughter may have discovered the secret to happiness." Lucas replied with a gentle grin. "She believes simple things are usually the important ones." Those words lingered in Natalie's thoughts throughout the rest of the day. Every floor she visited inside Reynolds Technologies displayed polished glass, expensive artwork, and sophisticated technology, yet she could not remember the last time anyone inside those walls had described happiness with such uncomplicated honesty. Friday arrived carrying bright autumn sunshine that poured through the company's glass atrium. Instead of eating lunch in the executive dining room as she usually did, Natalie walked into the employee cafeteria carrying her own tray. Conversations softened for only a moment before everyone politely returned to their meals. She scanned the room until she spotted Lucas sitting alone near the windows reading a paperback novel while finishing a simple turkey sandwich. "May I join you?" she asked. Lucas immediately stood. "Of course. Please," Natalie said with a warm smile. "Only if you promise not to stand every time I walk into a room." He chuckled softly before sitting again. For nearly 40 minutes they talked without mentioning quarterly earnings, maintenance schedules, or executive responsibilities. Natalie admitted she had not taken a real vacation in almost 4 years. Lucas confessed he had once dreamed of becoming an architect before life had taken him in another direction after becoming a young father. There was no regret in his voice, only gratitude for the daughter who had given his life purpose. Natalie listened carefully. "Do you ever wonder what your life might have been?" Lucas looked through the cafeteria windows where golden leaves drifted across the courtyard. "Sometimes. But then Ava runs to hug me after school, and every other question seems much smaller." Natalie lowered her eyes toward her untouched salad. "I cannot remember the last time someone waited for me to come home." Lucas did not rush to answer. He understood that some silences deserved respect instead of solutions. After a thoughtful pause, he said quietly, "Success gives people many places to go. It does not always give them someone to come home to." Natalie looked up slowly. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. As they returned their trays, several employees exchanged curious glances, surprised to see the chief executive officer laughing so naturally with a member of the maintenance team. Neither Natalie nor Lucas paid attention to the whispers beginning to spread through the hallways. They were too busy discovering something both had been missing for years. One had spent a lifetime building an extraordinary company. The other had spent a lifetime building an extraordinary home. Neither realized that those two worlds had quietly begun moving toward each other with every ordinary conversation. Nearly 2 weeks passed, and the quiet friendship between Natalie and Lucas became one of the few things neither of them had expected to find inside a corporate office. They never arranged elaborate meetings or long conversations. Instead, their paths crossed naturally in hallways, near the elevators, or over coffee during lunch. Those ordinary moments slowly became the brightest part of Natalie's demanding days. She found herself asking fewer questions about quarterly projections and more about Ava's latest school projects, while Lucas noticed that Natalie smiled more often than she had on the rainy evening when he first drove her home. Yet offices had a way of noticing even the smallest changes. One Monday morning, 2 employees paused outside the cafeteria after seeing Natalie wave goodbye to Lucas before heading toward an executive meeting. "Have you ever seen the chief executive officer spend that much time talking to anyone outside senior management?" one quietly asked. The other shook his head. "Never." By the end of the week, harmless curiosity had slowly become whispered speculation. Some assumed Lucas had been promoted. Others guessed Natalie was gathering opinions from employees on the front lines of the company. A few simply enjoyed inventing stories where none existed. Lucas noticed the longer glances first. Then came conversations that suddenly stopped when he entered a room. One afternoon, he overheard 2 contractors joking that the maintenance department now had a direct line to the executive office. The remarks were not cruel, but they left him uneasy. That evening, while organizing his toolbox before heading home, he stood quietly for several moments staring at the neatly arranged wrenches inside the drawer. He understood how quickly misunderstandings could grow inside any workplace. More importantly, he refused to become a reason people questioned Natalie's professionalism. The following morning, Natalie walked into the maintenance office carrying 2 coffees, only to find Lucas carefully reviewing inspection reports. He smiled warmly, but remained focused on his paperwork. "Good morning, Natalie." She noticed the difference immediately. His voice was still kind, yet noticeably more reserved. She handed him one of the cups. "I thought we could take our break together." Lucas accepted the coffee with gratitude, but gently shook his head. "Thank you. I should probably stay here today. There is still quite a bit to finish." Natalie looked around the room. Everything appeared unusually organized. Nothing suggested an urgent deadline. "Is everything all right?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "Everything is fine." She knew almost instantly that it was not. During the next several days, he remained respectful, professional, and consistently polite, yet he quietly stopped joining her in the cafeteria. He chose different lunch hours. If she approached in the hallway, he greeted her warmly before continuing toward his next assignment. Natalie tried to convince herself he was simply busy, but deep inside, she sensed something had changed. Late Friday afternoon, she stood alone beside the window of her executive office overlooking Seattle, watching clouds drift slowly above the skyline. Success had taught her how to negotiate billion-dollar contracts and solve complicated business problems. Yet she had no idea how to repair the growing distance between herself and the one person who had never wanted anything from her except honesty. At that very same moment, Lucas picked up Ava from school. She climbed into the passenger seat with her usual bright smile before noticing the thoughtful expression on her father's face. "Daddy," she asked gently, "did something happen today?" Lucas smiled softly as he started the engine. Sometimes doing the right thing feels harder than people expect. Ava looked out the window for a moment before answering with the quiet confidence only children sometimes possess. "If it is the right thing, maybe it is worth doing anyway." Lucas glanced toward his daughter, realizing that wisdom often arrived from the smallest voices. He only hoped that stepping back truly was the right thing, because already the silence between him and Natalie felt much heavier than either of them had imagined. Monday morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn sunlight, but the warmth outside never seemed to reach the executive floor of Reynolds Technologies. Natalie moved through her meetings with the same confidence everyone expected, yet every conversation felt strangely incomplete. Financial reports were approved. New contracts were signed. Applause followed another successful presentation. Still, her thoughts kept returning to the maintenance hallway where Lucas no longer waited with an easy smile and an ordinary conversation that somehow made extraordinary days feel lighter. By late afternoon, she could no longer ignore the quiet distance growing between them. Instead of calling an assistant, she left her office alone and rode the service elevator to the lower level where the maintenance department worked. The familiar scent of fresh paint, clean metal, and machine oil greeted her as she stepped into the workshop. Lucas was replacing a ceiling light fixture while quietly humming to himself. He climbed down from the ladder as soon as he noticed her. "Good afternoon, Natalie." His smile remained warm, but there was a careful formality in his posture that had not been there before. Natalie looked around the nearly empty workshop before speaking softly. "Have I done something wrong?" Lucas seemed genuinely surprised. "No." "Then why does it feel like you are disappearing every time I walk into a room?" He lowered his eyes for a moment, searching for words that would not cause more pain than silence already had. "People have started talking." Natalie nodded slowly. "I know." Lucas folded the cleaning cloth in his hands with quiet care. "You worked too hard to build this company. I do not want my friendship with you to become another story people use to question your judgment." Natalie stepped a little closer. "Do you really believe I care more about rumors than people?" Lucas answered honestly. "I believe you carry responsibilities that I do not." Before she could reply, footsteps echoed through the hallway. A small voice called excitedly, "Daddy." Both of them turned to see Ava walking through the open doorway carrying a lunch bag decorated with colorful stars. School had dismissed early because of a teacher workshop, and Lucas's neighbor had kindly driven her to the office. Ava hurried over and hugged her father before noticing Natalie standing nearby. Her bright face lit up immediately. "Hi, Miss Natalie." Natalie smiled warmly and knelt to greet her. "Hello, Ava. It is wonderful to see you again." Ava looked from Natalie to her father with innocent curiosity. "Daddy has been quieter lately." Lucas gave a gentle laugh. "Sweetheart." But Ava continued with the fearless honesty only children possess. "Are you the nice lady who made him smile again after work?" The workshop fell completely silent. Natalie glanced toward Lucas, whose cheeks carried the slightest hint of embarrassment, while Ava simply waited for an answer that seemed perfectly ordinary to her. Natalie smiled with quiet kindness. "I hope we have both helped each other smile." Ava nodded with complete satisfaction. "That is good because everybody needs somebody who asks if they are okay." Lucas closed his eyes for a brief moment, remembering the rainy night in the parking garage when Natalie had asked him the same question. Natalie looked at Ava, then back at Lucas, and realized the little girl had unknowingly spoken the truth neither adult had been brave enough to admit. Their friendship had never been built on titles, promotions, or admiration. It had grown from one simple act of kindness and one sincere question. As afternoon sunlight poured through the workshop windows, Natalie quietly understood that protecting each other did not have to mean walking away. Sometimes the strongest way to protect something meaningful was to stand beside it with honesty, dignity, and nothing left to hide. Natalie returned to the executive floor carrying a quiet sense of clarity she had not felt in years. Ava's innocent words continued echoing in her heart long after the maintenance workshop disappeared behind the closing elevator doors. Hundreds of employees worked inside Reynolds Technologies every day, each carrying responsibilities, dreams, worries, and private struggles invisible to everyone around them. Yet one little girl had reminded her of something every leadership seminar had failed to teach. The strongest relationships were built when someone simply asked another human being whether they were truly all right. The following morning, the quarterly board meeting filled the executive conference room with familiar faces, polished presentations, and carefully prepared financial reports. After another successful review of company performance, one board member leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. "Natalie, there has been some conversation throughout the company recently." She remained calm. "About what?" The director chose his words carefully. "Your growing friendship with a member of the maintenance department. We simply want to ensure professional boundaries remain clear." The room became unusually quiet. Several executives lowered their eyes while waiting for Natalie's response. She folded her hands gently on the conference table before speaking in the same steady voice that had guided the company through years of remarkable growth. "Professional standards matter," she said. "Respect matters even more. If showing appreciation for honest work and treating every employee with dignity creates conversation, then perhaps the conversation itself deserves our attention." No one interrupted her. She continued softly. "Companies succeed because people believe they matter. That belief cannot stop at the executive floor." Silence settled across the room. No one argued. The discussion simply moved to the next agenda item, but everyone present understood they had witnessed something far more meaningful than another business decision. Later that afternoon, Lucas completed a routine inspection of the company's rooftop ventilation system before making his way downstairs. As he crossed the lobby, Natalie happened to be walking toward the main entrance after finishing a meeting with community partners. She smiled naturally. "Heading home?" Lucas nodded. "Ava has a school music program tonight. I hope she enjoys every minute of it." Lucas smiled proudly. "She has been practicing every evening for 2 weeks. I think I know every song by heart now." Natalie laughed softly. "That sounds like a privilege disguised as homework." Before they could say goodbye, Ava came skipping through the front entrance holding the hand of the elderly neighbor who had driven her from school. The moment she spotted Natalie, her face brightened. "Miss Natalie." She hurried over carrying a folded piece of construction paper decorated with colorful crayons. "I made something for you." Natalie accepted it carefully. Inside was a simple drawing of 3 people standing beneath a bright blue sky. Above them, written in careful block letters, were the words, "Everybody needs someone who cares." Natalie felt her eyes grow warm. "This is beautiful, Ava." The little girl smiled proudly. "Teacher says pictures help people remember important things." Natalie looked from the drawing to Lucas. "She is right." Lucas thanked his daughter with a gentle squeeze on her shoulder before looking back at Natalie. Neither of them spoke for a few moments. They no longer needed many words. The distance that had once grown between them had quietly disappeared, replaced by mutual trust that neither gossip nor uncertainty could easily erase. As evening sunlight poured through the glass entrance of Reynolds Technologies, 3 ordinary people walked toward the parking lot together, and for the first time since that rainy night, the road ahead no longer felt uncertain. It simply felt like the beginning of something worth protecting with honesty, patience, and quiet dignity. Nearly 6 months passed, and the quiet changes inside Reynolds Technologies became impossible to overlook. The company remained as successful as ever, but something far more meaningful had begun growing beneath the polished glass walls and carefully planned strategies. Natalie introduced a new leadership initiative that encouraged executives to spend time each month working alongside different departments, listening instead of directing. Managers visited customer service teams, engineers joined warehouse employees, and directors shared lunches with custodial staff and maintenance crews. Productivity improved, but more importantly, people began greeting one another by name instead of job title. During one leadership meeting, a senior vice president smiled as he presented the latest employee engagement survey. "The numbers are the highest in company history." Natalie quietly set the report aside. "That is wonderful." Then she added with a gentle smile, "People perform their best when they believe they matter." Those simple words spread throughout the company faster than any official announcement. Employees repeated them during meetings, new supervisors included them during orientation, and the sentence gradually became part of the company's culture. Across the city, Lucas noticed the changes as well. Executives who had once hurried past maintenance staff now paused to say good morning. Young interns stopped to thank him after repairs. Even the cafeteria felt different, filled with conversations between people who previously would never have shared the same table. One afternoon, Lucas finished repairing a conference room projector just as Natalie stepped inside preparing for another presentation. She looked around the room before smiling. "You always seem to arrive before anyone notices something is broken." Lucas chuckled softly. "That is usually the goal." Natalie looked thoughtfully at the polished conference table. "I used to believe leadership meant always having the right answers." Lucas adjusted his toolbox before replying. "And now?" She smiled with quiet confidence. "Now I think it starts with asking the right questions." He understood exactly which question she meant. That evening, Instead of returning to her quiet lakefront home immediately after work, Natalie accepted an invitation Lucas had extended several weeks earlier. She arrived at his modest house carrying a homemade apple pie that she admitted had required 2 attempts before it finally turned out correctly. Ava opened the front door with joyful excitement. "Miss Natalie, you really came." Natalie laughed warmly. "I promised I would." The little dining room smelled of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and cinnamon. Family photographs covered the walls. School drawings decorated the refrigerator. A small vase filled with wildflowers rested in the center of the table. Nothing inside the house could be described as luxurious, yet every corner reflected care, patience, and love. During dinner, they talked about Ava's music recital, Lucas's weekend plans to repair the neighborhood playground with several volunteers, and Natalie's first successful attempt at baking a pie without burning the crust. They laughed easily, interrupted each other with stories, and lingered long after the meal had ended. As twilight settled beyond the kitchen windows, Ava disappeared into her bedroom before returning with a small blanket. She spread it across the backyard lawn and pointed toward the evening sky. "Come on. The stars are starting to come out." The 3 of them sat together beneath the quiet autumn sky, while distant city lights shimmered beyond the trees. Natalie looked upward, breathing slowly. She could not remember the last time she had watched the stars without checking the time or thinking about tomorrow's meetings. Lucas noticed the peaceful expression on her face, but said nothing. Some moments became more meaningful when left undisturbed. After several quiet minutes, Natalie finally whispered, "For years I thought I was building a successful life." She looked toward Lucas and Ava sitting beside her beneath the stars. "Now I think I was only building a career. This feels much more like living." Neither Lucas nor Ava rushed to answer. They simply smiled, allowing the silence to say everything words no longer needed to explain. 1 year later, the first gentle rain of autumn returned to Seattle, almost as though the city itself remembered the evening when 2 strangers had shared an ordinary drive home that quietly changed both of their lives. Reynolds Technologies continued to thrive, earning national recognition not only for innovation but also for a culture built upon respect, kindness, and the simple belief that every employee deserved to be seen as a person before a position. Visitors often asked Natalie what had inspired such remarkable change inside the company. She always smiled before giving the same answer. Everything important begins with listening. On that particular Friday afternoon, Natalie closed her laptop earlier than anyone expected. Her calendar still contained unfinished tasks, unread messages, and tomorrow's preparations. Yet for the first time in many years, none of them felt more important than where she was going next. She drove herself through familiar neighborhood streets instead of asking for a company driver. When she turned onto Lucas's quiet road, she saw warm lights glowing through the windows of the modest home she now knew by heart. Smoke curled gently from the backyard grill, while laughter floated through the cool evening air. Before she even reached the front porch, the door swung open. Ava ran outside with the joyful excitement that had never changed. "Miss Natalie, you are here." Natalie knelt to hug her warmly. "I told you I would never miss Friday dinner if I could help it." Lucas stepped onto the porch carrying an apron lightly dusted with flour from helping Ava bake fresh rolls. He smiled with the same calm kindness Natalie had first noticed in the underground parking garage. Perfect timing. Dinner is almost ready. Inside the house, nothing had become extravagant. The wooden table still held mismatched chairs. Family photographs had simply grown to include new memories. One frame showed Ava proudly holding her science fair ribbon. Another captured neighbors rebuilding the playground together. One recent picture showed all 3 of them planting flowers outside the community center during a volunteer weekend. Natalie paused in front of that photograph for a moment before smiling quietly. She realized happiness had arrived so gradually that she had almost forgotten what loneliness once felt like. During dinner, they shared homemade soup, warm bread, fresh apple pie, and stories from the week. Ava described a school debate. Lucas laughed about accidentally painting one work glove bright blue during a maintenance project. Natalie admitted she had finally taken her first real vacation in years after Lucas insisted that even chief executive officers needed rest. The evening passed exactly as the best evenings always seemed to pass, without anyone noticing the time. Later, the 3 of them stepped onto the back porch as soft rain began falling beyond the porch roof. Natalie watched tiny drops shimmer beneath the garden lights before quietly turning toward Lucas. Do you remember the first question I ever asked you? Lucas smiled immediately. I remember every word. She nodded gently. That question changed my life far more than I ever imagined. Lucas looked toward Ava, who was happily watching the rain dance across the flower beds. It changed mine too. Natalie reached for his hand with quiet certainty. There was no audience, no celebration, and no grand announcement. There was only peace. She finally understood that home was never measured by square footage, expensive furniture, or beautiful views. Home was the place where someone noticed when you were tired, where someone asked how you were truly doing, and where someone was always glad you had come back. As rain continued falling softly across the Seattle evening, the house glowed with warmth, laughter, and quiet dignity. Sometimes the greatest miracle does not begin with extraordinary success or dramatic change. Sometimes it begins with one sincere question, one small act of kindness, and two ordinary hearts willing to see each other beyond titles, expectations, and appearances. Everything else simply finds its way home.